Hi, it's Mark Graban here. This is a bonus episode. My book, The Mistakes That Make Us, is going to be available, or I should say the Kindle version will be available next week, Tuesday, June 27th. So I'm very excited about that. And my friend John Saunders was kind enough to organize and host a LinkedIn Live discussion today to talk about the book and the background and lessons and some random questions and things that I hope you might want to listen to and enjoy. So you can find a link to John's profile, the original event, if you want to participate in the discussion that was taking place there. You can find that in the show notes. So with that, I will turn things over to John.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Meet the Author Live. I'm your host, John Saunders. Great to see you. This is an opportunity to learn everything there is useful to know about authors. And as we go through the introduction here, please drop in the chat where you're joining us from. It's always fun to see where our listeners are from. Judged on looking at the over 800 of you that signed up for today, we've got people from all over the world, it looks like. So great to see that. Super excited about that. So yeah, drop a little note in there where you're joining us from in the chat. So today with me, third-time author Mark Graban, who is publishing The Mistakes That Make Us, Cultivating a Culture of Learning and Innovation. You can pre-order his ebook now for $2.99 for a limited time on Amazon. And the official release will be out next week. Is that right?
Tuesday.
Yeah. The 27th. Excellent. The Mistakes That Make Us, already a number one bestseller on Amazon. It's still in the pre-sale mode. That is incredible. And you can also get a pre-order, a signed copy of it, right, from your website?
They can, paperback or hardcover. That'll be available a couple of weeks later, but coming now, I guess I'll say in July. Yeah.
That's awesome. And so you can, on Mark's website, mistakesbook.com/shop. And you can use LinkedIn, all caps, LinkedIn Live to get free shipping on that signed copy. So that is super cool.
Put that in as a coupon code when it prompts you.
Perfect. And also, we're doing a raffle here, and I'll drop these links in the chat here in just a minute, where Mark's going to give away a few of his ebooks through a raffle. But just a little bit of a more background on Mark, really interesting background. So as I said, author, speaker, podcaster, over 15 episodes on the show. It's amazing. Mark serves as a consultant through his company, Constancy Inc., and is a senior advisor for the technology company Chi Nexus. He got his BS in industrial engineering from Northwestern, and both an MS in mechanical engineering and an MBA from MIT, leading for Global Leaders program. He has over 518,000 followers on LinkedIn, has hosted, as I said, 215 episodes of his flagship show, My Favorite Mistake.
There we go.
I have one of those coffee mugs, buddy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was a guest on the show last year. And Mark's had guests such as Daniel Pink, Shark Tank's Kevin Harrington, and 2 sitting members of Congress, and many, many more. Mark, great to see you. Thanks for jumping on an episode here. Yeah,
John, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for putting this together. Thanks again for sharing your favorite mistake on the podcast. That was great.
I appreciate the exercise. I think it's an important one for all of us to just think about what that favorite mistake is. So I really appreciate that you put that out there as, one of your opening comment or your opening question. And holy cow, the chat I just jumped in there has already lit up. We've got nice people from all over the place: Dubai, Detroit. There's Maxim from Dubai. We've got someone in Detroit. Nafis from across the river from me here in the DC area.
Yeah.
We've got people calling in from all over the place already. Thank you all for joining. Oh, we've got someone really staying up late to hear your story from India, right? It's getting a little late over there. Mm-hmm. Philadelphia. Oh, it's got a note here from Lee. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah. And one of your neighbors here in Kentucky.
Hi, Bill.
I love it. Oh, and there's Doug.
Your faces here. This is great.
Mark, Doug is loving your title there. Holy cow. This thing is lighting up here. So good. Well, great to see you all. Thanks for joining in. So Mark, let's jump into it here, buddy. Sure. How does it feel to have your third book out there? No less a number one top seller at Amazon already.
It's both exciting and I'll admit it's scary, right? I mean, just of throwing a book out into the world. I mean, as I was writing, I was working with an editor. I was working with a book coach. Hi, Tom. Hi, Kathy. I was getting feedback from a lot of people in the way, which helps me feel more confident about the book. But, you just hope it resonates with people, not just that people read it, but that it's helpful. Because, this is a topic that I care deeply about. And there's just always that risk of putting something out there of, you hope most people are going to like it. There's somebody inevitably won't like it, but I hope, you always hope at least the first review that comes in is a 5-star review, not one of the people who doesn't like it. But that's part of, I guess, just what's scary about anytime you put a video out or you write something or put yourself out there. Look, I'm open to the feedback, but it's still a little scary of, you hope something that you produce is helpful and appreciated. Yeah.
One of my favorite exercises, Mark, especially working with authors and anyone who's creating stuff and coaching them, if they feel sort of this uncertainty as you're feeling, is I'll take them to pick your favorite author that's, super well-known, Simon Sinek or whatever, and you can sort their reviews on Amazon by 5-star or by 1-star. So even, some of the most famous authors in the world have 1-star.
That's a good reminder. Yeah.
And not just 1-star review, they'll have dozens and dozens and dozens of them. So that's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that so vulnerably. Mm-hmm. So the mistakes that make us, Mark, what drove you to write this book? What's your why behind it?
Well, I think for one, there's that, that passion around the idea of learning from mistakes. And after doing the My Favorite Mistake podcast for a while, there's just this accumulation of stories that people would share about kind of the individual growth that can come from really kind of building upon a mistake, capitalizing on a mistake, turning it into a positive. I find that really inspiring, and and the guests who are sharing those stories, I think, set a great example and provide great reminders to all of us. So, look, we all make mistakes. Maybe what we have control over is how we react to those mistakes. And then I think there were great examples from a lot of guests of, whether they were business founders or CEOs or leaders in different levels, of how they're trying to cultivate that culture within their company. Because I think, all other things being equal, companies that are better at learning from mistakes are going to outperform those who aren't doing that. So there's a lot of passion, a lot of excitement that really kind of built from the gift that my podcast guests gave me of their stories and their vulnerability.
So interesting, and I love listening to everyone's mistakes and how they just share them so vulnerably. So, as you sort of look across your life's journey and these hundreds of people you've interviewed and your own experiences, why have these mistakes become so important to you? You think?
Well, I mean, there's all kinds of different mistakes that we make and run across. I mean, there's some mistakes that really just don't have any big impact on anything. We might still have to, kind of fight the instinct to, be hard on ourselves. So, okay, we made a mistake. One question we can ask is, well, what was the impact? And try to figure out how we can learn if needed instead of, just beating ourselves up. There are some mistakes that have a big impact. And I think especially as I've worked in healthcare a lot since 2005, you see too many cases where individuals, whether it's nurses or doctors or whatever their role is, they get blamed, I think, unfairly, unjustly for systemic mistakes. And the impact of this can be really dire in healthcare. I mean, mistakes can lead to harm or death. And, I think organizations that have realized that while we can work to prevent certain types of human error, when it occurs, it's counterproductive when leaders react in really punitive or blaming ways, because all that does is sort of drive people to be more clever, more creative about how they hide or cover up mistakes. And then, if that's happening, we certainly can't learn from them in a way that prevents mistakes or bad outcomes in the future.
Gosh, it really makes me think of some of the most catastrophic things we've experienced in sort of human history, particularly in the last 20 years. I think of the 2008 recession, right? Mm-hmm. Sort of the financial services industry was kind of covering up some of the mistakes they were making with lending, as an example, right? And kept brushing under the rug. And what happened at the back end of that?
You look at, famous disasters like the Challenger disaster, or, other things even happening recently. There's a pattern sometimes where a leader or a founder of an organization doesn't listen to the technical experts who work for them. Sometimes there's a catastrophe that's sort of driven by a mistake or a series of mistakes, and somebody might say, "Oh, who could have seen that coming?" But a lot of times, leaders weren't listening to the people who did see it coming, or at least were highlighting the risks. And I think that's an important part of an organization's culture. One that would be healthy and successful is for leaders to respect and listen to technical experts or people on their team who are trying to raise concerns about possible mistakes, especially, again, in circumstances where the impact of the mistake, where we could ask, what's the worst that could happen, right? It's one thing to make a mistake with, a marketing campaign and you use a tagline that doesn't resonate with people. Like, that's not a mistake to be overly scared of. But, there are certain situations where we do have to be really mindful of thinking, how do we prevent mistakes? How do we reduce or mitigate the risk of mistakes when that impact, could be really severe?
Yeah, you make such a great point there. And, I have certainly found in my coaching and career on Wall Street over the years that challenges, opportunities, mistakes, right? They're all pretty well known around the enterprise, but you've got to give people empower them to bring that to the forefront. And not everybody does that. So how, as a coach and consultant, Mark, how do you help coach leaders to deal with that and to bring it out in the open?
Well, I think for one, there's this question of, how do we help people bring, concerns or problems or mistakes forward. And part of that is creating an environment where people feel safe, or where they feel a level of psychological safety, where they feel safe to admit a mistake, because they know the organization and their leaders and their colleagues are going to respond in a constructive way, of looking at understanding why a mistake occurred instead of asking who messed up. And we kind of try to understand causes or root causes of mistakes. We need to channel that into understanding and learning and problem solving and prevention. So there's some organizations that I highlight in the book that I think have a really good culture in that regard. One is, a large famous company, Toyota, that a lot of people have written about. It's a company I've studied and learned from a lot over 25 plus years, where generally, and there's stories in the book from Toyota people about leaders reacting constructively in a non-punitive but helpful way. And then, a company, and you mentioned it, I'm wearing their logo on my shirt here, a software company, KaiNexus, a 12-year-old tech company in Austin, Texas. There's a lot of stories in the book that illustrate, kind of the intentional effort of leaders to lead by example in terms of admitting mistakes and not trying to pretend like they're perfect and all-knowing. Encouraging and rewarding people who admit mistakes, again, for the purposes of learning, not for shaming them or blaming them or ridiculing them. There's this healthy culture of sharing mistakes, and especially when you have opportunities to share small mistakes that, again, allow you to learn and improve in ways that prevent something that would be a more catastrophic mistake. So those are a couple of things I sort of try to help educate or coach leaders through, of building these habits that create this foundation of psychological safety that allows people to then speak up about mistakes. So then we can not just be, nice or say like, "Oh, I know you didn't mean to do that, John. It's okay." Well, like that's nicer. Being nice is better than being punitive, but I think being kind is constructive, right? So we're going to take action of not just saying, "John, it's okay," because you don't want to be nice over and over again when mistakes are being repeated. I think a kind reaction helps people understand how, why the mistake occurred, and what we can at least test some things and try to figure out how to prevent recurrence of that mistake. I think that's the kindest thing that we can do.
So important. And, there's so many great lessons in there, but really it's about sort of is making mistakes accessible and okay, and empowering people to take them, because then they're taking risks and growing and finding out better ways to do things and execute, right? And you talk a little bit in the book about, ideas around mistakes that should be prevented and celebrated. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? And I'm going to share, as you share this story, the chat is lighting up. I'm going to share a few more of our callers in here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are different situations and different types of mistakes. And I'll point and give a hat tip to Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School, who's written a lot of great stuff on psychological safety. And I've learned from her, and she kind of categorizes there are different situations and types of mistakes. So at the one end are mistakes that happen when we're trying new things, when we're being innovative and creative, and maybe the risk of a mistake is sort of low. If we're working to create new software or new marketing campaigns or things that aren't a matter of life or death, we can't know in advance what is going to be perfectly successful. So we need to think in terms of testing ideas and iterating and learning from mistakes as we go. And again, like expecting mistakes, if not celebrating them. But then I agree with Professor Edmondson. At the other end of the spectrum, there's a category of mistakes that would really come from, let's say, routine operations. We should know, or we do know, how to prevent these mistakes. Things like, I'll point to healthcare examples again, medication errors, wrong side or wrong site surgeries. Those are mistakes that that are preventable. We know if we do the right things the right way, we can, in the right culture, we can prevent those mistakes. So I'm not trying to encourage people to be flippant about mistakes. There are certain mistakes that are preventable and would have a big impact. We need to work really hard, in a diligent and disciplined way to prevent them. That said, because the world is complicated and human error occurs because we are human. None of us are perfect. We're all going to make mistakes, especially when we're fatigued or distracted, or, there are systemic factors there. Mistakes are still going to happen. And then there's that middle category that Edmondson talks about of, kind of a new combination of circumstances that, we just didn't anticipate. We didn't think that kind of mistake was possible. Those are all mistakes to learn from. And even when we're preventing mistakes or focusing on preventing mistakes, I think we have to be really careful to not react to the ones that happen in a punitive way. Because again, we want to be kind and constructive. We want to focus on learning and improvement and prevention. When the focus is on, what we often hear described in healthcare as naming, blaming, and shaming. Again, that drives people to hide and cover up mistakes when they can. And then, we lose opportunities to learn, and we're bound to have more mistakes. So there's this sort of counterintuitive thing where if leaders think punishing mistakes is the way to drive down the number of mistakes, I don't think it works that way. You might have fewer reported mistakes because people are scared. And that's different than actually reducing the number of mistakes that happen.
Unbelievable, right? And when you get the exact opposite of what you're hoping for when you make it punitive, right? You get people to take less risks, to hide mistakes, and then bigger problems can surface, right? Yeah. Somebody mentioned the BP disaster in here from a little while in the chat here. Thank you. Yeah. I got to tell you, Mark, this may be the most global audience I've ever seen. We've got like a dozen people from Africa chiming in here, Europe, all over the US, Dubai, Middle East, all over the place. So thank you very much, everyone, for chiming in here. Quite a global audience you have, buddy. So when you think about the mistakes that make us, and by the way, for our listeners, we're going to jump to the rapid fire segment here in a couple of minutes, and then we'll open up to your questions if we have time at the end. So if you do have questions, by all means, drop them in the chat. So Mark, when you think about the mistakes that make us, what do you really hope readers take away?
Well, I think, one is to understand the importance of what people call psychological safety. Instead of telling people or lecturing them or even encouraging them to speak up, you should speak up. You should feel safe to admit your mistakes. Like, you can say that. It doesn't mean people will feel safe speaking up about mistakes. So, instead of telling people to be brave, we need to reduce the risk that people face when it comes to speaking up about mistakes and other things. It's, I think when people, and we all find ourselves in this situation of like, should I speak up or not? Like, what's the benefit of speaking up versus the risk? When people choose not to speak up, or when they do choose to speak up, I think I've come to learn it's not a matter of character or courage. It's a function of culture, right? So I think instead of telling people you need to speak up, leaders can do things to reduce the fear factor and help people feel safe enough to admit a mistake. And then when they do, as a leader, you need to give them, that kind and constructive response instead of one that's punishing and punitive.
Right. This is how we learn and how we grow. And as I said, Mark's book is available now. You can go out and get it on Amazon. The pre-sale will be out next week. Special price, $2.99 for a limited time here. So go out and get your copy today. Looks like we've got some demand for your mug already here, buddy, from Dennis.
Dennis, Dennis is an old friend of mine from my hometown. I'll send you a mug, man. Thank you for being here.
That's awesome. I did just drop the Amazon link in there. If anybody wants to order Mark's book today, can't recommend it enough. I've really enjoyed it. I'm already into chapter 4 or 5, I think. Also drop Mark's podcast in the link here. If you want to go ahead and subscribe to Mark's podcast out there. It is a fantastic show. Let's keep going. What do you think you learned from writing the book, buddy? I feel like there's always learning as we write books.
Yeah. I mean, there's the book you set out to write, and then there's the book you end up writing. And I think one thing I learned was, I had opportunities to sort of try to practice what I'm preaching. For one, being kind to myself. If I've made what I thought were mistakes in how I structured the book, and I decided to, adjust and throw some material out and restructure and rewrite, I think that happens, right? So to accept that as part of the writing process and to embrace that, I think I've learned, chapter 7 in the book is about iterating your way to success. I think the process of writing a book can be an iterative process instead of it's thinking of a book like a startup, and the modern startup or lean startup approaches encourage entrepreneurs. Don't go into stealth mode. Don't go into hiding and, work for years in secrecy on some piece of software that you think is perfect. No, you need to get something out there, and you need to get feedback and test your ideas and realize, okay, it's not going to be perfect. So, get input, and it's not a matter of, just finding typos, but, getting input about readability and what resonates and taking some of that feedback. But I think, again, maybe advice to other authors, you're going to take in feedback, but ultimately the book is yours. You've got to decide whether it's conflicting feedback or feedback you might not agree with. I mean, it's your name on the cover. So I think ultimately sometimes you have to accept feedback, but sometimes you just need to say, okay, I'm going to stay true to this vision here, right or wrong, it's on me.
Wow. I was an honor for me to be one of your beta readers, and thank you for giving me an early access to the book. I really enjoyed reading it so far.
It was very helpful.
Thank you. So, right, how can we be kind to others if we can't be kind to ourselves, right? So I really appreciate you putting that message out there to the world. It's so important, particularly as you go through something as vulnerable as putting out a creation to the world. I will never forget the moment I announced my book to the world. It's a few years ago now, but I was riddled with just anxiety saying, oh my gosh, I'm doing this thing. And it wasn't even done yet. It was nuts. So it's a tricky one. And you've done it 3 times now. For those who are maybe even thinking about writing a book, Mark, how the heck did you fit it in your life?
It's a challenge sometimes. I mean, I think every time I've written a book, you've got to make certain sacrifices. Like the first time I wrote a book, Lean Hospitals, in 2007 was when I was doing the writing, fall of 2007. My wife was encouraging in terms of you've got to make time. I didn't watch a lot of football that year. I watched my Northwestern Wildcats, and that was pretty much it. I said, I need to use weekend time to write because the writing has never been a full-time job for me. So sometimes, I mean, whether you ask it yourself or you get that loving, challenging question from a spouse of okay, what are you going to do to make time? Right? Instead of saying I don't have time, you need to kind of flip the equation and ask yourself what you're going to do to make time. I did, as I was working on the book last year, kind of draw a line in the sand in November. I decided I was going to take a week of PTO just for book time. I canceled all standing meetings. I blocked off my calendar. I told people I'm working with, I'm really just I'm basically on vacation this week. And being self-employed, I can do that. And that was really helpful. But that was a luxury. A lot of times you have to just kind of figure out how to fit it in.
Right. I know one of the things I found with me is I was strangely found myself being hyper productive in my book late at night. So I would write from like
Oh.
9 p.m. and I needed the silence. So I'd wait for my kids to
Mhm.
go to bed. I'd write from 9, oftentimes to 1, 2 in the morning. And
Yeah.
it's crazy when you get in the zone.
Yeah.
Man, there were nights where I had to cut myself off, even though I was still getting after it at 2 in the morning.
You have to get into that flow state where like you can't say like, oh, I've got 45 minutes between meetings, I'll do some writing. Like I think you need to carve out blocks of time and kind of mentally get your head into the book.
So important. So we're winding down here and getting close to the rapid fire questions. Mark, goals for 2023, buddy. Now that you got this book out here coming next week.
Yeah, I mean, getting the ebook out, getting the print books out over the finish line with the great business partners that I'm working with here to get that done. I'm going to record the audiobook in July. I think that will be available for release in the fall. And then, I'm hoping the book will help open opportunities for more speaking engagements or coaching opportunities with different organizations. And, on the psychological safety front, I've been certified through an organization called Leader Factor, where there's a psychological safety assessment that I'm certified and licensed. I can license that from Leader Factor. So if people want to answer that question of like, well, what is our level of psychological safety? We can measure that. We can look at the baseline, and we can do some things as leaders to help improve that perception of psychological safety.
I love it. And if you want to learn more about Mark, I dropped his website in the chat here. It's on the screen, markgraban.com. And you can follow him or connect with him on LinkedIn at mgraban. Easy man to find out there. So my favorite question here, buddy, what is your favorite mistake?
And that's a very subjective question, right? What do you mean by favorite? So the one story I often tell is back in about 2004, when I was working at Honeywell, the last manufacturing company I worked with. The long story short of it is, I was being certified as basically a lean black belt, if you will, and I had to go do this project. And my mistake was not fully engaging the frontline production associates as much as I should have. Now, some of that was a function of culture. Like it wasn't a culture that would allow us to stop production and really spend time engaging the people who were doing the work. You had to find little moments here and there. So some of it was systemic, but still, I kind of take ownership for, my actions. I should have pushed harder to more fully engage the people doing the work, because we put together some technical improvements that basically weren't adopted. I think not because they were the wrong solution, but it was this change management lesson around when you don't fully involve people, it's hard to get them to buy in and commit to a solution that they're not really a part of creating. So part of the lesson learned, like, even as a consultant, is to not allow myself to be in a position where a client wants me to come in and fix things, but we don't have time to engage the frontline staff. Like that's the type of situation that I would say, no, thanks, good luck to, because it doesn't work. And there was a lesson learned. I took the lesson from it. There was probably a cost to Honeywell because that improvement, I think, really would have been an improvement. It didn't really stick. So there was some business, a little bit of business harm that resulted, and hopefully they've learned and figured out things like that over time. Thankfully, I think I did individually.
Isn't that a great lesson, though, to think about? You can't, if there's things happening, maybe some structural holes, you can't just sort of go work on one part of the business, right? Oftentimes it's going to impact lots of people, and you've got to get them involved to get their buy-in. Let's jump into a couple questions in the chat here. If we could maybe try to do these quickly here.
And if we run out of time, I'll come back and respond to other questions as replies.
We have a question here from recent author Doug Shear and Columbia professor. I'm seeing dissonance in the age of agile, where the organizational statement is failure is not an option, while at the same time promoting and formalizing the lessons learned. What would you say to an organization that doesn't allow this idea of the smallest miss?
I mean, it's a famous expression, and I get the spirit of it from, kind of the NASA space exploration story. But I think it's really dysfunctional when organizations say things like, failure is not an option. One of my guests, and somebody I really, really respect and admire, Rich Sheridan. He's the CEO of a software company in Ann Arbor called Menlo Innovations. When we talk about running experiments. And Rich said it so well. His episode's coming out soon. He said, if your experiments are always successes, you're not really running experiments, right? So we don't want to have, improvement theater or experiment theater or agile theater where we're just saying certain things, but not really living by these principles. So, in tech circles, people love saying things like, fail early, fail often. I'm like, well, let's not keep failing. I think what Doug might be encouraging is, if failure is an option, and if we're going to learn from mistakes that lead to failures and really have lessons learned, it's those small misses, right? We need to fail early and fail small as a way to prevent the big failures, right? So instead of fail early, fail often, maybe it's more like fail early, succeed later as a result.
I
It's
like
not
that.
as pithy as fail early, fail often, but I think that's a better way of looking at it.
I like that. Doug, thank you. Professor Scheer, thank you for jumping in there. We've got a question from John Thompson, another recent author, How to Be an Ace in Business and Life. He has a question about how the heck did you get your LinkedIn audience so big, buddy?
I have to thank LinkedIn for that, because they've been very kind to me. And I don't think this is a repeatable process, where they early on in what they were calling their LinkedIn influencers program, they invited me to be a part of that. They now call this top voices. And, their criteria early on was you had to be a published author. And I got picked and tapped on the shoulder to be one of the healthcare industry top voices. So they aggressively recommend that people follow me. And, unfortunately, I don't think there's a process where you can apply to be part of that. So, I mean, I'd like to think some of it is what I've done to sort of try to build, or at least keep those followers, or, encouraging others. So a lot of it, I think, is just the result of that gift from LinkedIn. And then I think some of it is trying to take good advantage of that gift by sharing, content that's interesting or thought-provoking or helpful in some way.
Well put. There you go, JT3, buddy. That's the secret. Mark was an early adopter when there was, much, and then leaned into it. So well done on you taking advantage of the opportunity there. So let's dive over into the rapid fire questions here, and we'll wrap it up in just a couple of minutes here, Mark. This is my favorite part. You ready to go? Rapid fire?
Let's do it.
Favorite sandwich?
Favorite sandwich? I don't eat a lot of sandwiches because I'm trying to avoid bread. Well, it's maybe people will debate this all day long in the chat. Is a taco a sandwich?
Huge taco fan.
I'm in Texas. I love, let's say, a beef fajita taco.
Nice. We do a lot of Taco Tuesdays around this household. Favorite color?
Favorite color? Purple. I went to Northwestern University, the Wildcats, and school color is purple. So I ended up with a lot of purple clothing. I love purple.
Shout out to the Big Ten. I went to Wisconsin undergrad. Favorite vacation spot?
Oh boy. I'll say Scotland. Like I've been fortunate to be able to go visit Scotland a couple of times, including a couple of tours to distilleries in a couple of different regions, Speyside and Islay. It's a pretty magical place. So hello to anybody who is watching there in Scotland.
Mark also has a podcast that celebrates the brown water, I think it's called.
Water of Life is back to some of the origin of the word whiskey, whether you believe that to be true or not. Water of Life. Yeah.
Jason is going ahead and disagreeing with you here. Taco is not a sandwich. I'm going to have to agree with you, Jason.
Is a quesadilla a sandwich? Maybe that's more like a sandwich than a taco. Just to stir things up.
I love it. And now I'm going to go to Jason was on the show a couple of months ago when his book came out in Relationships to Infinity, and maybe he had one of the best answers to this question. Scariest animal, Mark?
Oh, gosh. When I lived in Phoenix, scorpions. I never got stung by one, but when you hear of, like, it's not only a matter of don't step on a scorpion, but that a scorpion could climb the wall and fall into your bed at night. That was terrifying. And I had a friend of mine I worked with who got stung. We're talking about learning from mistakes. Hey, Blake, if you're watching, twice he had a pool in his backyard and he grabbed the towel and threw it around his back, and there was a scorpion hiding in there and it stung him.
Ow.
2 different times.
Ow. Shanna, thanks for sticking up for Mark here. Appreciate that. That's awesome. Jason's was hyena, by the way. He knows more about hyenas than anyone I've ever met. First concert you went to.
Well, Jason was a guest on My Favorite Mistake too, by the way, and his story is featured in the book. So shout out to Jason.
Oh, nice.
First concert I ever went to. The first concert I ever went to without parents, with friends. It was I think it was senior year in high school, seeing Sting in play in Detroit. I think Joe Louis Arena.
Very cool. I think for me it was Steve Miller. Last photo on your phone.
Oh gosh. Rather than make it up or lie, let me look. It's actually a photo I took of an easel pad from a workshop I facilitated on Wednesday. How boring is that?
Hey, you're out there doing it, buddy. You're out there working. What is one thing you own that you should really get rid of?
One thing that I own that I should really get rid of. Okay. In that cabinet in the bookshelf behind me is the box full of old cables and chargers that I refuse to untangle and take to electronics recycling. I should do that this weekend.
I have a similar box in my basement somewhere.
Yeah, I think we all do. I might need that cable someday.
Right?
Apple is not going back to the old wide adapter. Get rid of it.
I probably have 40 miles of old coaxial cable down there too for some reason.
You might need
it. Yes, you get ready to sign all these books for your pre-sale folks. Well, have you ever asked anyone for their autograph?
I do. In my travels, I've run across a lot of, famous people on planes or airports, and I try not to bother anybody, but I did have an opportunity recently, pre-show Bare Naked Ladies concert. There was kind of meet and greet opportunity. I did ask their drummer, Tyler Stewart, for an autograph, and he did so. And I mean, everyone in the band is great, but I play drums, and so of anyone in the band, I'm like, hey, Tyler, sometimes the drummer doesn't get a lot of attention. So I asked, he signed. So I'm happy. I asked, I'm happy he did it.
Was he surprised? Hey, someone wants my autograph.
I think a little bit, but he appreciated it.
I did want to read, you had an amazing quote for your book I want to share with our listeners here real quick from the famous author Daniel Pink. I've read a few of his books now, and I wanted to share this with our listeners. I know Jason Levin also had a great quote from him for his book. Dan Pink, on your book, The Mistakes That Make Us. At last, a book about errors, flubs, and screw-ups that pushes beyond platitudes and actually shows us how to enlist our mistakes as engines of learning, growth, and progress. Dive into the mistakes that make us and discover secrets to nurturing psychological safety, a psychologically safe environment that encourages the small experiments that lead to big breakthroughs. That is awesome. How'd that feel to get that from Mr. Pink?
That was, well, it's exciting and scary to ask somebody for an endorsement, and you hope they're going to like the book. Dan has been exceedingly kind to me, doing an endorsement for a previous book, Measures of Success. And, I had a fellow Northwestern alum who was a classmate of Dan's, introduced me to him. So there's a bit of a Northwestern connection, but I'd like to think he didn't just write the blurb because of my purple clothing that I often wear. So I appreciate Dan taking the time, to lend, such a nice endorsement like that. And I've been a big fan of Dan's books. He's been a guest on My Favorite Mistake, and his book, The Power of Regret. We talked about how mistakes can lead to regret. There's kind of good connections. So I hope people will check out his books.
That book is sitting right here, Power of Regret, right behind my head here. I love that one. A couple of questions here, and then we'll wrap it up here. What would you say to those thinking about writing a book?
I mean, I'd say for one, go do it. I mean, there is an infinite amount of shelf space on Amazon, which is both, good that you can look, there's room for your book. Everyone has, I think, their own unique stories and perspectives where they can write a book. It doesn't have to be an incredibly long, intimidating book and I think, so there's a lot of competition out there for books with that infinite shelf space. But I think, to write a book, use it as a calling card, use it as a way to share ideas and stories that are meaningful to you. I think the process of writing a book, even if it doesn't sell a ton of copies, I've always said, I think if you're going about it in an iterative, inquisitive way, if you want to learn more about a subject, take a subject you think you know something about and start writing a book about it, and you'll end up learning more along the way. So I would say, yeah, go do it. Go find a coach. You don't have to do it alone. I would encourage people, find an editor or have an editorial board. I intentionally nowadays, I write my books in Google Docs because it's easier for other people to come in and look and add comments. And, I think, don't go into your book cave and just write a book in secrecy and then try to launch it into the world. I mean, I think try to, whether you're hiring people to help or you have, advisors, let people read, give you feedback, and iterate in a way that makes the book better.
Right. You can't wait till it goes on Amazon to start talking about it. And you've done a brilliant job of this, promoting it over the last number of weeks. And so excited for you, Mark, and congratulations. How would you describe your writing journey in 5 words?
You let me think about this in advance, which is good. So I'll just say, be ready to iterate often.
I love that one.
Reminding myself of that. Don't be hard on yourself when you're like, oh, I didn't write it perfectly the first time. Well, nobody ever does. And then just the other random tip, and I try to remind myself this, at some point, stop thinking about what you're going to write and put fingers to the keyboard, start writing. And then that's what editing is for.
You can't edit a blank page, can you?
Don't try to write a perfect first draft. No one ever does.
No first draft manuscript has ever been published, right?
And don't publish your first draft. That's probably a mistake too.
Clearly. Closing thoughts for our listeners, my friend.
I want to thank everybody who who's tuned in today. Thank everyone who's been encouraging and helpful along the way. John, you've been very generous with your time, just as a fellow author. We've become friends from doing the podcast, and so I appreciate your generosity and not just giving feedback, but organizing this session here today. So I hope people will remember. Maybe I'll answer the question one other way. So I've got this coffee mug here with the logo, but then the side I'm looking at has some reminders and mantras that sort of came to be through the course of doing the podcast and reflecting on it. So I'll just read what's on the mug here, and I read it to remind myself these things. Be kind to yourself. Nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. The important thing is continuing to learn from our mistakes. So key. I love that. And I love having that mug in my kitchen cabinet. And Dennis, I'm going to send you a mug.
And I would encourage everyone to drop their favorite mistake in the chat here, and we can we'll have some little comments with that as this will go posted on LinkedIn and YouTube here as soon as we hang up in just a minute or two here. But Mark, thank you for your kind words there. It's been a pleasure to get to know you and become friends with you over the last year or two, and certainly be on your show. I think I was episode 145. Now you're at 215. Absolutely incredible. Yeah,
we'll put the link to your episode in the chat there, and thank you for that.
Please do. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. Thanks for sharing your story here. Congratulations on your new book. Thanks to all our listeners out there for joining this episode of Meet the Author Live. Definitely go check out Mark's new book, The Mistakes That Make Us, Cultivating a Culture of Learning and Innovation, wherever you buy books online. And you can learn more about him and his podcast at markgraban.com. I'm your host, John Saunders. Keep making mistakes out there, but make sure you learn from them. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Thanks, John. Well, thanks again to John Saunders for organizing this and hosting it today. I really appreciate his kindness and generosity in doing so. For links to the pre-order, or after the 27th, it'll be just the ordering and the instant downloading at that point of the Kindle version of my book, The Mistakes That Make Us. Look for a link in the show notes. You can pre-order signed copies in paperback or hardcover by going to mistakesbook.com/shop. And again, you can find notes for that in the show notes. As always, I want to thank you for listening. I hope this podcast inspires you to reflect on your own mistakes, how you can learn from them or turn them into a positive. I've had listeners tell me they started being more open and honest about mistakes in their work. And they're trying to create a workplace culture where it's safe to speak up about problems, because that leads to more improvement and better business results. If you have feedback or a story to share, you can email me, myfavoritemistakepodcast@gmail.com. And again, our website is myfavoritemistakepodcast.com.